the burden is not on government. The burden is on us. The burden is on us to say, I want a healthier community, a community that disagrees peaceably, that can respect the fact that it's okay to have different opinions and to be very passionate about those opinions. But I'm not going to dehumanize you or vilify you in our disagreements. And if we could do that, we can reduce the amount of violence in our country. Hey, Adam.
Elizabeth, good to see you.
It's really good to see you. We met actually in Birmingham.
Right.
Our classes did a crossover.
Yeah.
We were doing our first seminar, and you were doing class 1 was finishing.
Yeah,
right?
that was our last seminar.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that faith has been really important for both of our lives and has kind of informed our careers. And we come from kind of different parts of the Christian community and world. But I would love to hear a little bit more about your faith journey and kind of how that has shaped you.
Yeah. And likewise, I want to hear about yours. I grew up in the North Dallas area, so Bible Belt, conservative evangelical tradition. No denomination specifically, though I've been in, as an adult, a Southern Baptist church, Presbyterian Churches of America, PCA. And then more recently, I'm a member of an EPC church, Evangelical Presbyterian Church. And also a lot of Bible churches. Bible church is really big
Right.
in Dallas, which are...
It is the Bible Belt. But
Yeah, it is the Bible Belt. But the through line probably is fairly conservative. And certainly, you go to college and you start to define your own faith. And I kind of spent, 10 years in my early career. Certainly never left the faith, but I wasn't actively practicing. I would occasionally attend church. Had a couple of key moments in my life where I was kind of shaken by various things not going the way I expected them to go.
Right.
And it really kind of forced me to examine what I believed and if I was actually living out what I believed.
Right.
And it took me kind of on a journey back to rediscovering my faith for myself.
Yeah.
And so it is very dear to me, and certainly has, even since that coming back moment, taken me on a journey of uncovering things that I maybe was taught when I was younger that as I explore scripture maybe don't line up with what I read in scripture. And I think I'm still on that discovery journey of how do you practice our faith well, and how do you love God and love people well. But what's your faith journey been like?
Yeah. So I, grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and, my family was active in a Presbyterian church and then a congregational church. And while, faith was definitely important, I felt like it was more of a casual faith. It was kind of more social. And I certainly, believed in God and, was grateful for a lot of those early opportunities. But I didn't really necessarily feel like it was a deeply kind of personal faith, if you will. So I grew up very much in the shadow of the civil rights movement. And my mother's Black, my father's white, and they got married in 1968. So a very controversial time, and literally got married the year Dr. King was assassinated. And so they instilled in me this really strong belief that my generation inherited the unfinished business of the civil rights struggle. And so from like an early age, I became infatuated with the civil rights movement. And so through that, I really discovered the role of the Black church as kind of the infrastructure and the, spearheading so much of the civil rights movement. And that enabled me to kind of see the connection points between my faith and my love for justice, and really seeing those things as inseparable, even though, I think one of the fault lines within the church is kind of this separation of those things from each other, or at least a very different interpretation of what justice means, right? We can talk more about it if you want. So I ended up going to college in Atlanta, and literally the first Sunday I was there, I made a pilgrimage to Ebenezer Baptist Church, the spiritual home of Dr. King.
Yeah.
And the service just blew me away. And, the gospel choir and the call and response, and then the sermon just beautifully weaved together a call to a personal redemptive relationship with Jesus with a commitment to justice in the world.
Mm.
And I literally walked the aisle that day and joined the
Oh my
church
gosh,
and
that's
was,
so
yeah, like active through my 4 years. And then I started to experience what essentially was a call to ministry. But I fought it because
mm,
I associated ministry with only being a pastor of a church, right? And that's obviously very important expression of the call to ministry.
yes.
But I didn't really feel like that was my call. I was really passionate about politics and policy, and I got accepted to the Kennedy School of Government, and I was on my way there. And so I went to Tanzania for my last week, and it took me a while to kind of reconcile this, but I finally realized, actually, after having taken a climb up Mount Kilimanjaro, and I went into this kind of meditative state, and I really felt the presence of God. It wasn't like this booming voice, but I could
Mhm.
feel God's presence. And I was kind of having this conversation with God, and I was like, well, why did you bring me to the top of this mountain? And I felt kind of this answer of like, I didn't bring you here. This is all you, right? And then I had created this false choice, this false binary, if you will, between going into ministry and kind of going into politics, even though I didn't necessarily want to become an elected official per se. And that the whole reason that I am so passionate about social justice is because of my faith, not in spite of my faith. And literally, I snapped out of this and just felt this incredible sense of peace and turned around and just walked back down. And like, it was definitely a like definitive moment for my vocation. And so what I realized is like my particular call was to try to revitalize a commitment to justice within the church broadly, not just the Black church, but
Yeah.
across the board. And that's one of the reasons why it feels like such a good fit to be a Sojourners, because we are an ecumenical Christian organization that works with Catholics and mainline Protestants and evangelicals and the Black church and more to really try to enliven a commitment to justice and peace.
It's it's such an important mission, and it got really hard. I would say, what, the last 10 years? There was this
Yeah.
moment where a good part of the church was having really important conversations about the past sins and confessing those and, um, making strides to try to address the institutional or the systematic ways in which the church is complicit or directly responsible for a lot of horrid things in the past. But then something shifted, and I, maybe because I was raising kids, I also was going back to Washington, D.C. I never quite understood why, if it truly was just political forces that, came into the church and said, "No, no, like, if you talk about social justice, that's, communistic or liberal,"
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
I mean, 'cause then, again, from the community I came, being labeled a liberal is, like, a really bad thing, right?
You're a heathen. Come on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was this moment where those conversations shut down, and they've actually done studies of like the number of times a sermon would talk about racial justice issues or talk about the sins of the past, and there was this big spike, 2014, 2015, and then it just clipped. It just dropped off, 2018, 2019. And I'm just curious from your perspective. I mean, you were working in this space at this point.
Yeah.
That must have been really hard to see momentum not only stop, but like regression. Like it was like we can't even hold the line where we made it to. It's
Right.
like, no, we're taking multiple decades steps back.
Yeah. No, it has been really hard to watch and to be in the midst of it. I mean, I think there was it felt like there was progress in the early 2000s in trying to break particularly evangelical Christians out of this what I would describe as an overly privatized faith.
Yeah.
And more evangelical Christians were concerned about justice issues, whether it was hunger around the world. I
Mhm.
spent some time working for World Vision and really felt like there was kind of a height of a compassionate conservative
Yes.
moment,
I was
right?
a big part of that movement.
Right.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
played a really, big role in advocating for a major initiative on HIV and AIDS. And
Mm,
that, helped to create the President's Emergency AIDS Plan,
yeah.
which I think was the crowning achievement of the Bush
I
administration,
agree.
right?
I agree.
26 million lives have been saved as a result of our generosity and our commitment there. But then you're right, something did shift. So might be a good segue to talk a little bit about your books, The Kingdom of Rage.
Yeah.
But I know, we both share a deep alarm and a deep concern about the impact of Christian nationalism, both on our, shared faith tradition,
Mhm.
but also on our democracy.
Yeah, my background, I spent 25 years doing, national security, homeland security work, and, the last time I was in government was during the Trump administration. I served as the Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism. He was not my version of Republican. My first foray into politics was George W. Bush. He was governor in Texas when I was there, and then he ran for office, and I came to Washington with his administration. So Trump is a very different figure, very different approach to governing. And I really didn't have much of an interest in coming in the first place, but had been asked by a friend to come in. And after saying no a couple of times, the security mission in me kind of um, I felt a compelling need to come in and try to help.
Yeah.
Um,
When I imagine serving your country too.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
a positive thing.
it is. It just was a very different context.
Yeah.
And during my tenure, we started seeing all of these attacks. And actually not just attacks, just moments that made you go, "Wait, what is happening here?" Charlottesville was like
Yeah.
probably one of the first major ones where we were trying to understand what is this? Like, since when do people, march and they're not hooded? You can clearly see their faces, and they are not ashamed
Yeah.
to be white supremacists. What is happening, right? That was a big shock, I think, for much of the country, but even in the law enforcement counterterrorism community, that was really alarming. And then from there, we started to see a spate of attacks and number of plots that are often not talked about. And if you go back and you look at the trend line, we, since 2015, had been seeing a pretty marked rise in attacks and plots that kind of sounded the alarms for us. We have a problem. We have a major problem. And for 20 years, we had been fighting ISIS and Al Qaeda and doing a relatively decent job at it, but had completely missed this growing threat that was here domestically.
Mm.
And of course, now, after spending a number of years studying this, you can go back and look at the stats. If you take out 9/11, it is by far the number of attacks, plots, deaths are not due to religious extremists from the Muslim faith. It is due to white supremacists and anti government extremists that are predominantly white men, many of them who claim the Christian faith as their own.
Right.
Now, the ideology they use and the way that they use their Christian faith, you and I would be like, that is not what Jesus taught.
Right.
But it's not dissimilar from Islamist jihadist extremism, right? Like, if you meet the average Muslim, they would say that is not what my faith teaches.
Yeah.
And so we were really blinded by the fact that we had a similar problem, and it just kind of burst forth in the late 2010s. And I did my government service. I tried to do what we could and put policies in place. It's more difficult to go after violent extremists inside the United States than it is to go after them outside of the United States for a variety of constitutional and legal reasons. And it should be more difficult for the government to use its tools against its own citizens. However, the thing that really always concerned me was that we weren't having a public conversation about the fact that this was coming from within. And then as time has passed, the ideology has lessened in terms of its role in motivating somebody to commit an attack. And what we see more and more is we just have a lot of people that are very violent and who have lost hope, who have found that we actually have a new category that came out in the last year that the FBI created, the nihilist violent extremist, which is what it sounds like. You just have people that have lost hope and have decided, well, okay, I'm just going to go out by committing a horrific act of violence, and there's no point to life anyway.
Right.
And so there's this sense that um, the people that move down that pathway of violence are deeply hurting. And some of the work I do in my day job is applying what we know about why people move down the pathway to violence in an online context to try to reach people before they commit an act and try to offer them mental health support, because we do know that you can disrupt and intervene violence. But what does that mean for the moment that we're in and Christian nationalism? It's really in trying to educate myself and trying to explain to the public, why do we have so much violence? And I personally believe we don't have to live this way. I think it's insane if you look at how many attacks we have now compared to even 10 years ago. And we're so numb to it at
Right.
this point.
Right.
We don't have to live this way. But in order for us to change that, we have to know why this is happening, and we have to confront some of the contributing factors that are leading people to this place that violence is the only solution to their problems. And so part of that effort, I ended up writing the Kingdom of Rage, was to specifically reach the conservative Christian community. One, because we're, in my opinion, too close to the problem. We're like complicit in the way that we tolerate the dehumanizing language that leads to violence. And I want to be clear, there's an important role for government to play when people cross that criminal threshold.
Yeah.
But in my field, when you think about violent extremism, there's multiple steps that happen before you commit that criminal act.
Yeah.
And it's harder for government to do that work. But it's absolutely the job of civil society, of communities, to say, no, we're not going to treat each other this way. We're not going to bully. We're not going to harass. We're not going to, intimidate and threaten. All of those are steps on the way to violence. And so it is kind of my passion to try to wake up our various communities to this problem, to the fact that we don't have to live this way, but the burden is not on government. The burden is on us. The burden is on us to say, I want a healthier community, a community that disagrees peaceably, that can respect the fact that it's okay to have different opinions and to be very passionate about those opinions.
Right.
But I'm not going to dehumanize you or vilify you in our disagreements. And if we could do that, we can reduce the amount of violence in our country. What is heartbreaking to me is that the Christian church, which, based on the teachings of Jesus, should be one of the leaders, one of the lights in this country, calling for a return to those civil norms of peaceful disagreement and treating each other with dignity and respect, and of course, never dehumanizing somebody because they were made in the image of God.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's the opposite. We have way too many Christians participating in the dehumanization of immigrants, in the dehumanization of their political opponents.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they're just blind to it. They're clearly caught up in a political movement that's giving them belonging, and it's the norm in that community to use that kind of language. But my hope is that by helping connect the dots, that kind of behavior actually does lead to violence, that it would help people go, oh, I really shouldn't be acting that way. I would never let my kid act that way.
Yeah.
So why am I acting that way
Right.
online, right?
Right.
There's so many faithful Christians. They tend to be quiet. They tend to not make a big stink. And so what you might see if you're on social media or watching a news clip of the latest Turning Point USA gathering is not necessarily reflective of what I think the bulk of the church in America is.
Right.
But we really need the moderate in temperament and peace-loving Christians to actually speak out and say, no, that is not our faith.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's the disconnect.
Right.
Too many people are quiet and on the sidelines.
Well, and I really, you mentioned January 6th. I thought that was going to be a wake-up call, and maybe in some ways it was. But I mean, the kind of dissonance and just horror that I felt in seeing fellow Christians, at least, quote unquote Christians, who were literally praying before they ransacked the Capitol, that were, holding crosses and having signs that, had quotes from Jesus, was really painful to watch.
It was.
So some of what I've been doing a lot of work around, this is through Sojourners, but also through other organizations too, is really try to understand what are the on-ramps out, and how do we disciple people away from the idolatry of Christian nationalism, right? And, there's no magic bullet, but I think that there's so much more work that we have to do to ensure that many of those people that are feeling the sense of nihilism can feel a sense of belonging and connection, that, we can, really emphasize the Christian virtues that I think could be a healing force within our politics, right? We need more truth telling. We need more kindness. We need more gentleness. I know that kind of sounds crazy in light of where our politics is today. So one of the things that I've thought a lot about, particularly as we approach the quincentennial, the 250th birthday of our nation, is this really important need, maybe even imperative, to what I describe as redeem our sense of patriotism. Because
love that vision.
I think the left, and I'm generalizing, but I feel like the left in the United States too often has a kind of reticent relationship with patriotism, and at worst, kind of doesn't want to acknowledge any of the good that exists or that has been done. And then the right has these blind spots or this unwillingness to reckon with some of our ugliness and some of our sins, if you want to put it in theological terms. And so for me, like a healthier form of patriotism is where you can reckon with the past, but you also celebrate what you love. And we can all love slightly different things, but there is so much to love, right? And to me, like the best form of patriotism is the patriotism that calls all of us to better realize our ideals of liberty and justice for all, which is obviously ingrained within our ethos, but also our documents, our founding documents. I wrote a book called A More Perfect Union, A New Vision for Building the Beloved Community. And one of the things I felt really strongly is that you can't replace or defeat a harmful moral vision, which I think is, kind of what the MAGA vision is, without having a more unifying and hopeful and positive one. And so one of the ones that has certainly inspired my life and certainly animated the civil rights movement is the vision of the beloved community, which for me, kind of put in contemporary words, is to build an America where neither punishment nor privilege is tied to any parts of our identity, and where everyone is equally respected and valued, and where our growing diversity is seen as a strength and not a threat. And what I love about the definition is, like, you can measure the first part, right? This is the public policy nerd in me coming out. But the second part is very aspirational, right? And so I'm curious, like, how you resonate or not with that, but also kind of what is your sense of moral vision as it shapes leadership that you're trying to provide?
Yeah, it's interesting you use the beloved community, because I actually ended my book with that vision
Oh, that's
too.
great. I didn't.
Not as you do a much a deeper treatment and exploration of it, but towards the end, I wrote about terrorists and violent extremists. You got to give people hope at the end, right?
I agree.
And part of what I was trying to encourage in the second part of the book is, what can we do from a government perspective? What can you personally do? What can your church do? And how we can address some of these underlying drivers that are leading to the fracturing that our communities are experiencing. And I kind of was left with this challenge. I felt, what if none of it works, right? Like, that there is this reality that there is no guarantee that our country continues. Benjamin Franklin famously said, if you can keep it, right? And so that I do feel like there's a unique moment for us as a generation where we're calling into question, do we want this experiment to continue? And the way I closed my book was focusing more from the spiritual perspective of, we do what God called us to do. And that vision of beloved community, that is what God called us to do justice, to walk humbly, to love mercy. And we do it regardless of the outcome, because we trust that God will deal with that. But we do need to grapple with the fact that these are trying times. Our country has gone through them before. I have great optimism that we can get through this, but it does require all of us to come to the table and say, I don't like the way that we're interacting with one another, and the way that we don't take care of those in need, the way that we're not doing justice. And I want something different. And I want the next 250 years to be that more perfect union. We can get there, but we have to collectively decide that that's what we're going to work towards.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing to that, which is that both the journey to a more perfect union and to the beloved community is both a destination and a journey, right? And there can be, like, so much joy and hope in the journey, even if there's struggle. We know the struggle is real, and I agree with you. We are in a very, very dire place with kind of where we are politically in our democracy. But, I hope that, you know, all of us can show greater courage and resilience in the midst of this.
I wanted to ask you, as somebody who's trying to lead in this difficult time, how are you doing, and how are you finding you have to change your leadership to adapt to challenges like the fact that you're advocating and not always seeing many wins?
It's been hard. I won't try to sugarcoat it, right? I've had my moments of feeling pretty demoralized. I think my faith is kind of an anchor in the midst of that. It certainly helps me to see the long view and, ultimately believe that I'm victorious because of Christ's death on the cross. But also just this sense that even when you're involved in the campaign like we were trying to mobilize moral resistance, if you will, or opposition to the big bill, because we really argued that it reversed biblical values, that it, kind of took from programs, Medicaid and SNAP, that benefit some of the most vulnerable Americans, all to extend tax cuts primarily for millionaires and billionaires. And so that was just a stark example of something that was immoral. And so, yes, we lost the, battle of the immediate bill. But if you look at public opinion on the bill, it is way underwater.
Hmm.
And I think there was some kind of muscle that was built in terms of advocacy and mobilizing within some parts of the Christian community that are going to be critical as we go forward. The kind of framework that we're using, which I think is a powerful one, is that this is a time where we have to do as much as we can to block the harms that are being done, particularly toward vulnerable communities. We've got to bridge across difference. And, to me, that is rooted in a steadfast love that is so core to our faith.
Yeah.
And we've got to build and cast a bold alternative vision, like what we talked about earlier. And so, different individuals and organizations are going to be called to focus on different, one of those three pieces.
Sure.
But for me, that's kind of where I'm getting hope, because I actually think that Sojourners is kind of working on all three, and I'm starting to see some real progress and hope in each of those different areas.
That's really great to hear. I have watched since this new administration came in, nearly every public policy topic that I have worked on in 25 years be dismantled. It's been really hard to watch. So, somebody asked me, it was early on, like in February, like, gosh, this is a lot. What are the coping techniques that you have? You used to deal with counterterrorism. You must have really good coping techniques. And I'm like, every coping technique I have is not working right now.
Right.
I'm having to completely, totally redesign how I do my self-care, how I'm checking in with people. And so I think one of my learnings from this past 6 months is it's okay to not know how to do this well, because this is rather unprecedented.
Right.
Um, some of the things that I've picked up from others, the importance of community, and just
Yeah.
being with people
Absolutely.
who are like-minded, who you can grieve with.
Mhm.
And I do think there's a grieving that, first of all, as a Western society, we don't do grief well. And that's a problem. I think that actually has led to a lot of the problems we see in our society with anger and, various pathways that lead to even worse harms. It's stunted grief. It's
Yeah.
because we can't properly digest disappointment and walk through a grieving process and get to the other side. So I strongly encourage anybody who is leading right now and leading in difficult circumstances, don't don't rush to the next thing. It's okay to stop and grieve, and if you need help, go ask for help and how to grieve well. Grieving in community can be helpful too. And the grief is cyclical for me. I mean, just yesterday, another round of grants were cut, which means there are going to be more people that are going to be laid off. And these are people doing important work, saving lives, and it's hard to watch.
Yeah.
So don't skip the grief. That would be one thing. Find community, safe places where you can mourn together, and but then also find places where there's laughter. Get out in nature. I have kids, that keeps me grounded. My goodness, it's great that 11 and 14-year-olds are mildly aware of what's going on out there, but they're much, much more focused on what's happening in their
Yeah.
sixth grade class, right? And so that keeps you grounded. But it's certainly difficult to care for yourself and care for your team. So I would encourage all of us to make sure we are caring for ourselves so that we can lead better. One of the visions that this was not original to me. Somebody wrote a book a couple of years ago uh, with a vision of leadership that was being the non-anxious presence
Mm.
in a world that's uncertain and anxious. And so that's what I certainly don't achieve that daily, but
You strive for it, right?
but
Yeah,
that's
no,
like
it's
kind of
beautiful.
the
It's
vision
beautiful.
is like, how can I be non-anxious
Right.
for my team today, non-anxious for the uh, people that I'm trying to encourage. And maybe that is success for the moment. Maybe it's not about winning the legislative fight. Maybe it's about helping the people in the communities that are feeling this grief, that are feeling this massive disruption, to take that next step. And we're going to keep moving forward and not going to become overwhelmed by all of the challenges that we're seeing around us. Thank you so much, Adam, for catching up with me. It's been great to see you here.
Yeah, you too. You too.